Radiation is one of the scariest parts of the Fallout universe. It's everywhere. Glowing pools, ruined vaults, entire regions locked in fallout centuries after the bombs. But to understand why these places are so terrifying, it helps to know what radiation actually is and what it does to the body. In real life, radiation is energy released from unstable atoms. Too much exposure damages your cells and breaks down DNA. It can lead to burns, sickness, cancer, or even death. It's invisible, and that's part of what makes it so dangerous. You don't see it, but your body feels the effects almost immediately, if the dose is high enough. Basically, you're being cooked from the inside out. Fallout takes that real danger and pushes it even further. Instead of just sickness or cancer, radiation creates ghouls, glowing monsters, and region where the land itself becomes unlivable. It doesn't fade with time, it lingers in the craters, vaults, and the storm systems, changing the world into something permanently hostile. Where our world uses radiation suits and careful containment to survive, Fallout shows what happens when there's no control at all, when the fallout is everywhere and no one is safe from it. So with that in mind, let's dive into some of the worst radiation horror stories in the Fallout series. This looks like a normal ruined commercial district, but behind the super mutants and broken buildings is one of Fallout's more horrific radiation stories. The area is full of the usual fighting, mutants, mercs, and even a behemoth. But behind Tacoma Industrial is something a lot of people don't see on the first run: the irradiated pool and the story of the two scientists who tried to study it. Getting there means climbing through the industrial building, exiting onto the roof, and then working your way down into a canal that's glowing with radiation. The water itself is lethal, with barrels of waste spilling out into the pit. Cross the canal and you'll find a small camp. Terminals left behind tell you about Isabella Proud and Jason, two researchers who set themselves up right next to the pool. They came here wearing radiation suits, trying to study how it worked and even how it might affect mutated humans. This didn't end well. Isabella's research logs show how long they've been working near the pool. For over a month, they moved closer and closer, trying to collect real data about ghoul behavior. She noted that feral ghouls didn't fear daylight, but tended to gather indoors. And then she began experimenting with lures. One experiment was to fill heavy basins with water and irradiate them at different levels. The basin with the most radiation drew in the greatest number of ghouls, proving how strong the pull of Fallout was for these creatures. She named specific ghouls she observed, like Melinda, who once approached her but didn't attack, only sniffing the resin-coated radiation suit Isabella had been wearing before leaving. It gave her the idea that feral ghouls could be more complex than most believed, maybe even capable of communication. When a group of ghouls returned days later, she and Jason observed them using a screen for cover. The group settled into the irradiated water, led by an alpha male she called Samuel, a glowing one that clearly drew the others together. At this point, Isabella stopped being cautious. After weeks of watching, she wanted direct contact. She decided she would approach the ghouls at dusk. Knowing that Jason wouldn't agree, she secretly coated his radiation suit with the irradiated resin she had been using on the basins, hoping it would draw the ghouls in and let them get closer. That decision was their last. Both scientists were killed, and their camp was left destroyed beside the glowing pool. When the lone wanderer arrives, Isabella and Jason are dead. Samuel has become hostile, and feral ghouls stalk the ruins. The irradiated canal itself is still dangerous, with barrels leaking fallout into the water. Isabella tried to push science into a zone where the world itself had already been changed beyond recovery, and it cost both her and Jason's lives. What she did to Jason in the name of science is pretty horrific, using him basically as bait just to see how the ghouls reacted. Insane. Vault 34 is one of the worst examples of how radiation can destroy a community from the inside. It was overcrowded from the beginning, and arguments over access to the armory turned violent. During one of these uprisings, the reactor systems were damaged. Once that happened, the cooling vents and other critical infrastructure failed, and radiation started spreading through the entire vault. From that point on, everything inside was slowly poisoned. The people who stayed behind had no escape. The main door had been sealed after the earlier exodus of the group that would later become the Boomers, and with guards posted, no one else could leave. When the reactor began leaking, they were trapped in a space where the air, the water, and even the walls themselves carried radiation. Engineering teams tried to stabilize it, but nothing worked. The reactor continued leaking for years, and fear and panic spread as quickly as the contamination itself. The result was long-term exposure that turned a once functional vault into a nightmare. Generations who lived through the leak were slowly irradiated, and by the time the courier discovers Vault 34, almost every resident is dead or has become a feral ghoul. A lot of them glow with the amount of radiation in their bodies, turning the dark halls into green light. Some of them are still wearing their security armor, but the people themselves are gone, replaced by creatures kept alive now by that same contamination that killed them. The reactor chamber is the most dangerous part. Radiation levels spike as you move closer. The core is still unstable after decades. Flooded sections of the vault have dead technicians floating under the desks, their bodies glowing from the exposure they suffered trying to fix the system. These little details tell us just how desperate the residents were. They worked until their last breath, right next to the very source of radiation that was killing them. What makes Vault 34 even worse is the damage wasn't contained inside. The radiation leaked into the ground outside the vault. By the time the NCR started farming nearby, the contamination had reached their sharecropper fields, threatening crops and food supplies. A disaster that started as an internal fight inside one vault spread into the Mojave, and it's probably going to affect the land far after the incident. A single moment of chaos damaged the reactor, and the fallout turned an overcrowded vault into a prison filled with radiation. The survivors were changed into ghouls, and the land around it was poisoned. In Fallout, radiation lingers just like in real life. The difference is that while it can erase everything, it might still leave something else behind. The glowing sea is the most irradiated place in the entire Commonwealth. It sits in the southwest corner of Massachusetts, and it became ground zero when a high-yield nuclear bomb hit during the Great War. The explosion destroyed mostly everything in the blast zone, and it left behind a permanent radioactive scar that spread for miles. The glow from this region can be seen from far across the map. Radiation in the glowing sea is not just background aesthetic, as we know. The levels are so high that unprotected people can die within minutes. Water sources give off far more rads than anywhere else in the Commonwealth, and walking into the open ponds is lethal in seconds. Even standing on the ground here means absorbing a constant dose. It shows us what an area looks like when it's been locked in Fallout for over 2 centuries with no recovery at all. The land is dead and warped. The trees are reduced to blackened stalks, and the ground is cracked and sunken. And most of the buildings are buried or broken into pieces. The crater at the center is a hollowed out scar where the blast hit hardest, and that's where the children of Adam have built a small settlement. They live right inside the source of the radiation, worshipping the bomb that destroyed everything around them. For them, it's holy, but for anyone else, it's lethal just to approach. Radiation in the glowing sea doesn't stay contained there either. Rad storms are created in this region, carrying radioactive dust and clouds into the rest of the Commonwealth. These storms sweep across Boston, dropping the levels of radiation on people who have no choice but to take cover. The glowing sea continues to poison the world beyond its borders. Life that exists here is changed entirely by radiation. Death claws, rad scorpions, and other mutated insects thrive in the environment. Feral ghouls wander through the ruins, their bodies kept moving by the same radiation that tore them apart. Even someone like Brian Virgil, who was hiding from the Institute, is safe only because he's a super mutant. It's a place that forces people to change or die. The glowing sea is different from most other irradiated zones in Fallout because of its size and intensity. It's an entire region locked in Fallout, unlivable for normal people, and still strong enough to affect the rest of the entire Commonwealth, and who knows where else 200 years after the bombs fell. I wanted to bring up the sea, but I also wanted to talk about locations within it. So if something else comes up from the glowing sea, you know why. The Mesquite Mountains crater and Hell's Motel give us a good idea as to what happened to the Mojave when Mr. House's defenses failed during the Great War. House stopped most of the incoming warheads, but 9 of them slipped through. One of them hit this area southwest of Prim, carving a huge impact site into the desert. The blast left behind pools of irradiated water that still give off dangerous levels of rads centuries later. But of course, the crater isn't empty. Feral ghouls wander through it, drawn to the radiation. Some of them are stronger reavers, glowing from contamination they've soaked up over the years. This wasn't a place anyone could rebuild. It became a zone where the only things that could survive were creatures that thrive in the radiation and fallout. On the edge of the crater is Hell's Motel, a 2-story shack once used by a ghoul named Dr. Rotson. He set up his home right in the middle of the contamination, growing glowing fungus on the porch and filling his kitchen with irradiated food. Living in this zone may have been possible for him, but it was still deadly. By the time the courier finds this place, Dr. Rotson is already dead inside, his body left in a pool of blood while a malfunctioning Mr. Handy roams the building. Probably the same thing that actually killed Rotson. Radiation might give ghouls longer lives, but it doesn't make them invincible. Rotson tried to live out in a home in one of the most contaminated places in the Mojave, but eventually it might have caught up to him. But mostly I find this place cool because it is one of the locations of those 9 warheads. Does House really care about this place? Absolutely not. But I bet it irks him every time he thinks about those little mistakes. Vault 87 is one of the deadliest locations in the Capital Wasteland, and not just because of the super mutants inside, but really because of the radiation outside its front door. The direct path to the vault entrance is drenched in extreme levels of rads. The game makes it clear that walking straight in is impossible without near instant death. The numbers climb so fast that it serves as basically a wall of radiation, shutting out anyone who tries to reach it. I think it might actually be the most irradiated location in the games. I'm not sure, but what I do know is that you can find a spot here where the radiation is peaking at 4,000 rads per second. That's a shit ton in case you were wondering. And this level of contamination didn't happen by chance. The vault was hit hard during the Great War, and the surface around it became saturated with fallout. The blast zone left the entire entrance poisoned, and even 200 years later, the ground is still deadly. Bones and debris in the area show that people had been here before. But of course, no one could ever reach the vault without dying almost immediately. There's even a guy in a radiation suit near the entrance, but not even he had a chance. What makes this even worse is what it implies about the people inside. Vault 87 was cut off from the rest of the world, not just by the sealed doors, but by the wall of radiation outside. Anyone trying to escape would have been faced with certain death before they even reached daylight. That left the residents trapped in a place where experiments with FEV would go on unchecked, turning them into super mutants that later filled the Capital Wasteland. The exterior of Vault 87 shows that radiation can create barriers stronger than steel. A door might be forced open, but radiation doesn't budge. It lingers, it spreads, and it makes whole stretches of land impossible to cross. In this case, it made Vault 87 a prison with a radioactive moat, locking its inhabitants inside and ensuring that whatever happened in there stayed hidden until the mutants began to climb out.
Hang on there, traveler. You'll want to steer clear of this place. The whole town's irradiated to high hell. I was stationed at Camp Searchlight before the incident.
Camp Searchlight gives us a good example of radiation that can be turned into a weapon long after the bombs first fell. Before the war, convoys carrying nuclear waste were diverted here during the chaos of 2077. The town's fire station ended up being used to store fuel rods that were supposed to stay sealed forever. 2 centuries later, when the NCR set up a major base in the area, those casks were still inside. It should have been a secure stockpile, but Caesar's Legion saw an opportunity. Under the orders of Vulpes and Colta, Legion agents infiltrated the camp. They broke into the fire station and unsealed the rods. When they did, a wave of radiation poured across the base and the town. The release killed the infiltrators immediately, but it also tore through the NCR forces inside. Soldiers caught in the blast zone either died within minutes or were poisoned so badly that they later turned into ghouls, and it left the whole town uninhabitable. Walking through Searchlight today, everything is soaked in rads. The homes, the school, the churches, they all give off steady radiation. Even the air carries it. The town looks mostly intact compared to other ruins in the Mojave, but it is a deadly trap. Every building has NCR soldiers turned ghoul inside, wandering in their old uniforms, shuffling along slowly with their knives, like they're still trying to fight even after their minds are gone. They're the NCR troops who were stationed here, changed by the disaster that killed their base. The fire station is the heart of the event. This is where the rods were opened, and it remains one of the most contaminated spots in the camp. Creatures that thrive on radiation, like rad scorpions or golden geckos, have taken over the ruins around it. The schools and churches that once served the town are now crawling with these beasts, feeding off the warmth left behind by the fallout. For the NCR, it was a psychological blow. The camp was meant to be a foothold in the southern Mojave, and in one strike, it was gone. First Sergeant Astor now leads the survivors from a safer distance. His logs tell us that he blames himself for not stopping it, even though the attack was carefully planned and almost impossible to prevent. Private Edwards, one of the few who lived through it inside the town, admits to the horror of seeing comrades die or turn into something else right before his eyes. Camp Searchlight is different from the other sites in this video because it didn't come from a bomb that fell during the Great War. It was the result of sabotage after the world had already been ruined. Radiation here wasn't random fallout drifting in from somewhere else. It was released deliberately to kill soldiers and turn a thriving base into a radioactive graveyard. The cratered hamlet in Fallout 3 looks like a small neighborhood that got destroyed, with a few broken houses around a massive crater. Inside the crater are barrels of radioactive waste, and the whole area gives off steady radiation. That part makes it different than just being another bomb crater, since apparently someone dumped waste here long after the initial blast. Or it looks like maybe a truck full of radioactive waste ended up crashing into the crater as the bombs were falling. The houses around it still have wrecked cars out front, which tells me that the people of this neighborhood never made it out. I mean, obviously, look at the houses. It probably wasn't the radiation and more like the blast. North of the crater, there's a bus that's crashed with skeletons still nearby. It feels like people tried to get out, but they didn't make it. Or maybe they ended up caught in the radiation later. It's not the most insane radiation spot, but I wanted to include it anyways because I found the fact that there's still barrels here weird. The waste in the center shows it was turned into a dumping ground afterwards, or at least somehow they ended up here after the bomb, making the damage worse. It's a small spot, but it tells the story of a neighborhood that was destroyed twice, first by the bomb, then by the radiation that followed. The Decayed reactor site sits deep in the glowing sea, and it's one of the most dangerous radiation zones in the Commonwealth. The location is built around 2 half-buried reactor domes and a small control room, all that's left of a power facility that was destroyed when the bombs hit. Walking inside the domes means stepping into some of the highest radiation levels in the game, spiking it up to 40 rads a second right in the center. That's enough to kill anyone almost instantly without heavy protection. The control room plays a looping message. A broken automated voice repeats warnings of a meltdown.
Warning, reactor breach detected. Meltdown imminent. Meltdown in 15 seconds. Meltdown in 10 seconds. Meltdown in...
The message has been stuck on repeat since the day the bombs fell, a recording of an emergency that no one survived to fix. It's a reminder that when the reactor failed, the people inside had no time to escape. Radiation isn't the only danger here. In the southern dome, there's the body of a child of Adam, who died holding a gamma gun. It looks like they came here as part of their worship, treating the leaking core as a holy place. The fact that they never left shows the reality of what that devotion costs: total exposure until death. On top of that, a death claw sometimes nests inside the dome, sleeping right next to the corpse. So yeah, that seems pretty bad. If the radiation didn't get you, this thing definitely would. It's another location where radiation is still pouring out in lethal waves, where an old automated system has been endlessly counting down a meltdown that already happened, and where even worshippers of Adam die trying to draw closer to what they see as divine. South of Chased Acres Dairy Farm, someone once tried to build a makeshift toilet surrounded by ruined cars. The idea seems to have been that Rex would keep Yaogwai or other creatures away. What they didn't account for was the fact that they built the entire thing on top of a radioactive pool of waste. Radiation seeps out of the ground here, strong enough to poison anyone who is nearby, just like everything else we've talked about. The outhouse itself sits right over the glowing water. It's clear someone thought they could claim this patch of land, maybe even make it livable, but the choice of building on irradiated ground guaranteed that wouldn't last. The pool below was already toxic, and the cars above just corroded in place. Walking in here feels like stepping into a failed experiment. The person who set it up didn't survive, and the outhouse is all that's left of their effort. At least I assume they're dead. What else could have happened to some guy taking a shit on top of a radiation-filled pond? Now the place just attracts dangerous wildlife like rad scorpions and Yaogwai. The irradiated outhouse doesn't have the same size or infamy as places like Vault 87 or Camp Searchlight, but it tells that same kind of story. Radiation doesn't just wipe out cities and vaults. It destroys individual lives in small attempts at rebuilding. One wastelander tried to create something here, and the land itself turned against them. But maybe that's just Darwin's theory for this specific location. Swan's Pond looks like a quiet park in Boston, but the water tells a different story. The pond itself is irradiated, and anyone who drinks from it takes in far more radiation than normal, 5 times more than most sources across the Commonwealth. It shows how poisoned this small patch of land has become, and how dangerous it is even without the monster hiding in it. Toxic waste barrels can be found near the groundskeeper's shack on the northwest edge of the pond. The radiation there spikes so fast that it can kill quickly, making the building nearly impossible to reach without strong protection. The barrels explain why the water itself is so contaminated, turning what was once a public park into another fallout pool that never recovered after the war. But the water here isn't empty. A unique super mutant behemoth called Swan lives beneath the surface. He attacks when disturbed, dragging anyone too close into a fight in the middle of the contaminated pond. Around the ponds are notes, skeletons, and signs that people tried to use the area after the bombs fell. Some left research logs, others simply died against the trees or by the statue nearby. Their bodies show that people continue to be drawn into the irradiated park, whether for science, survival, or just by accident. And the result was always the same: radiation exposure, Swan, and death. These could have also been people who were here as the bombs were falling and got caught up in the initial fallout. But in the world of Fallout, you'll find poison spots like this, where the environment, the water, and the creatures inside all feed off the radiation that never goes away. Okay, how do we not bring up the divide in a radiation video? I tried to keep this one short and to the point because we've covered this place a lot, but radiation here is some of the most disastrous we've seen in the games. It's one of the most irradiated regions in the entire series. When dormant missile silos hidden beneath Hopeville and Ashton detonated, the ground itself split open. Entire highways and towns collapsed into canyons, and nuclear fire poured out into the air. The result was not just destruction, it created a landscape permanently poisoned by radiation. The detonations turned the area into an ongoing storm zone. Fallout clouds mixed with dust and ash, forming radioactive sandstorms, strong enough to strip flesh from bone. These storms never cleared. They constantly sweep across the land, making the divide a place where exposure is unavoidable. Radiation here isn't just background hazard, it's actually tied to the weather system. The survivors caught in that disaster became the marked men. They weren't killed outright, but the storms and radiation burned their skin off and kept them alive. Their bodies are trapped in a cycle of being flayed and regenerated by constant exposure. Radiation is the only thing sustaining them and forcing them into a state between living and dead. The destruction also contaminated everything under the ground. Old silos, bunkers, and tunnels still leak radiation, and the canyon walls glow with the remnants of the blasts. Even decades after the detonations, the divide continues to pour fallout into the air, feeding the storms that spread death across the ruins. It's an environment that no one can live in without protection, and those who tried were either killed or changed by the exposure. It's a place where the bombs created a permanent, self-sustaining nightmare. Radiation isn't limited to pools or reactors here. It's in the weather, the soil, and the people. It never fades, and it makes the divide one of the worst examples of nuclear contamination in the entire Fallout universe. There's obviously more radiation stories and locations to be found in the games. I mean, it is called Fallout. So if there's something you want me to cover in a future video, let me know. I really do appreciate you guys watching, and remember, enjoyed time is never wasted time, and I'll see you in the next.